Hello, my name is Yemi,
And my name is Ijeoma.
and together we'll be hosting Africa in My Kitchen, a podcast that will explore African cuisine from the lens of an experimental home cook. In each episode of the podcast, we'll explore an African dish by country and discuss Ijeoma's experience in replicating the dish.
The podcast is released every 2 weeks. Also, check out 234 Pantry on Instagram. That is numbers 234 PANTRY, where I'll post pictures and links to the recipes we discuss.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another delicious episode of Africa in My Kitchen. It's Yemi here.
And Ijeoma as well, checking in.
Oh, thank you, Ijeoma. Thank you for joining us.
Very welcome. Glad to appreciate my presence.
Oh, my Lord. We are here physically distancing. We're recording separately from each of our separate apartments. We do not live together, but we are doing what we believe to be the responsible thing and staying physically distant from each other. We've both been fortunate to be able to work remotely from home. And so as part of supporting our system, healthcare workers and essential workers, we are actually staying away from each other as part of the advice. So, Ijeoma, I don't know if you have anything to say.
Please stay at home. Please stay. That's what I want to tell you. Please stay at home. Think twice if you need to be outside. And I'll give you an example. I really wanted to make Chapman, which is a drink that I think it's a Nigerian drink, and it's a cocktail, and it involved Angostura bitters. And I was going grocery shopping last week, and I looked into different Safeways. And then I thought about it, do I really need to go to a third Safeway to look for this Angostura bitters? Do I really? Will I collapse if I? And so no, I turned around and so please think about it. There essential services are open for a reason, but essential workers are also opening up themselves to risk. And sometimes they don't even want to be there, but they're there. So just think about whether you actually need to be out.
Sit at home, go out for essentials, wash your hands, don't touch your face, remain safe. But yeah, enough. Now that we can get off our soapbox, we can just jump right in.
So judgmental.
Man, got that right. So we're going to go into Benin.
If you're from there, we hope we said it correctly. We think that's how we say it. Some people say Benin, some people say Republic of Benin. And if you've never heard it before and you're reading it for the first time, you might call it the Republic of Benin, but it's really not the Republic of Benin.
Exactly.
Benin is a West African country with a population of about 11 million people. It shares its borders with Togo to the west, Niger to the northeast, Nigeria to the east, and Burkina Faso to the northwest. Along its southern border is the Bight of Benin, which is part of the Atlantic Ocean. It was once colonized by France, and now French is the official language, and they also have multiple African dialects that include Yoruba, Fon, and Bariba. Just as an aside, Yoruba and Bariba are two languages that are also spoken in Nigeria.
And so the meal we're going to be working on and talking through today is called Amiwo. And not to beat it to the bush, but you guys read in the description that I'm the eater, not the cook. And we are physically distancing, so that's the excuse I'm going to hang my hat on.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's my excuse. That's what I'm going to stick to for the next little while. So I was not there when the meal was cooked, and so we're going to ask the questions. So, Ijeoma, do you want to just jump in and just talk right about the meal? Start with a description, if you could, of what it is. Yeah.
If I were to use a universal word, I would say it's some kind of pudding but it's really a mix of tomato sauce and corn flour and water. And you kind of pour it into a mold. And by a mold, I mean a container of your choice, usually a ramekin or a bowl or something. And it actually sets in that and becomes solid. So traditionally, there's a special kind of maize flour that they use to make it. But the best substitute I can find for a quick way to cook it is to use corn flour, which is readily available in most parts of the world. So, Amiwo is usually eaten with a protein as a side. So I think it's like the main meal accompanied by maybe turkey or fish or something like that. And then you also have it with a little bit of a sauce, a pepper sauce.
So is it eaten typically as like a breakfast, lunch, dinner?
I don't think I feel like in that case, it would be based on what I found anyway. I believe you can eat it. It's not like one of those dishes that are time specific. So like I know people who eat beans, for instance, for breakfast, lunch, or for dinner. Same thing with eggs, actually. So that's the way I would think of it. It's not like it's not specific to a particular time of day, as far as I could tell anyway.
Okay. So could you walk us through the ingredients you use? I know you just talked about them high level, but if you could itemize the ingredients and then how they come together as well.
Sure. So I would describe it as having three basic things. So you need your things for the corn flour water mixture, and you have corn flour and water. In my case, I didn't even have corn flour, actually. I had cornmeal, but it seemed to work just as well. So corn flour and cornmeal, my understanding is that they are pretty much the same, except that corn flour is flour, so it's been blended a bit more than cornmeal, so it has a bit of a finer texture. But when I used corn flour, it still worked. So you have your corn flour and your water mix, and you mix that together and set that aside. Then you have your sauce base. And with that, you have tomato sauce. You use tomato sauce, some onions, pureed onions, diced hot pepper or cayenne pepper or chili powder. I use chili powder.
Pepper is amazing. Pour all the pepper in it.
I'm just going to say something really, really socially anyway.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say that if anybody here is Nigerian, all I need to tell you is that Yemi is Yoruba and Ijeoma is Igbo, and then you realize we started talking about pepper first, and then it just makes sense.
I'm telling you, pepper makes anything taste good.
It does not, actually. Too much pepper can make food not taste good because you can't taste anything. You're too busy coughing. No, I'm just saying.
We're going to leave this for another episode where we discuss the awesomeness of pepper.
The merits of pepper. Okay. So you have that. You have your tomatoes, your onions, a little bit of oil, some salt, and your hot pepper. And then you also have a broth. The broth, typically all the recipes I saw came with the Amiwo was eaten with turkey, and they used that turkey to prepare the broth. So what you would do then is you have a little bit of oil, and you make your stew base with it. And I honestly think, even though there is a recipe, I would encourage you to look at the recipes. I feel like you can freestyle a little bit. If there's a particular way that you make your sauce, your stew sauce or your tomato-based sauce, I would say as long as it's not too runny, go ahead and make it that way. So you would start by frying the tomato sauce with some onions, and then you add in your peppers and your salt. Now, a key thing to add into that sauce as well is broth. And that's why I think you should really go all out. I think the key thing here is if you think about it, you're dealing with a tomato-based sauce, which is tomato in itself is sour. And then you have corn flour. Corn flour and water together are not really appetizing. But then you have your broth. And it's your broth that's going to have all the flavor in it, right? So I would say go ham with the flavoring. So when you fry that, you make the tomato base.
Ijeoma, I do have a question, John. I'm going to interject. So when you say go ham with the flavoring, are you talking about flavoring of the broth, or are you talking about flavoring of the tomato base?
Flavoring of the broth.
Okay. And this broth, would it be a turkey broth, or can it be a broth that you buy in store? Because sometimes I buy prepackaged broths in store. Or is it something you would encourage that you would make your turkey and use the broth from there?
So I would say here, if you have some broth that you can make on your own, it would be good, just because then you can put in as much flavor as possible. And I think that is really what, in my opinion, that's what brings out the taste of the Amiwo, because corn flour is not particularly flavorful. Your tomato sauce is a little bit sharp because of tomato. But then if you have the broth, that really kind of evens out the taste and rounds it out a little bit. That being said, if you wanted to go with like store-bought broth, for instance, you could possibly do that. I haven't tried it personally, but again, I don't see why you can't use store-bought broth and then add stuff to it as well.
Usually when I cook my own meals, I buy the meat frozen So I buy store-made broth and then I put that in the meat. So I find that if I just use frozen meats directly, it doesn't give quite as nice a flavor. So I can appreciate the fact that even if you don't make your own direct broth, it could still be substituted by store-made for the purpose of this meal. So yeah.
Okay, let me just say I'm not an authority on it,
Mhm.
but well, people are really possessive about their meals, but we live in a time where convenience is a factor, and ingredients that we're traditionally used to are not available. You have other options. Because of that, somebody who's more of a purist might say, "Well, you have to use pure broth." But quite frankly, I don't see what the big deal is. Whatever works for you as broth, I think is fine.
Okay, that's fair enough. So if you could walk us through the process.
Sure. So the first thing I had to do was mix the corn flour and the water together, and then allowed it to we just basically set it aside for a bit. And I think the proportion I used, I don't really like to go into quantities and stuff like that. And I've talked about this before, but I'll always give you the recipe to go and look at. It was, I think, 3 cups of water to 1.5 cups of corn flour or cornmeal, and set that aside to sit. Then you make your sauce base, and that involves frying your tomatoes and peppers and onions together to make a sauce, and then you add some salt and some seasoning. You let that cook for a while, then you add some broth to it. You allow that to simmer together, and then what you do after that is you mix the corn flour water mixture you add that basically into the stew, and you stir it slowly until it starts to thicken. Then you put some oil, a little bit of greasing a bowl essentially, or a ramekin or something like that. You grease that, and then you pour a mixture into the ramekin and let it set for about 30 minutes. I was a bit of a skeptic because I was looking at this thing in a pot and going, so you don't need to bake it, you don't need to cook it, it's just going to set by itself. And it did.
Oh, so that was going to be my question actually. You didn't actually cook anything? It was just leave it and forget it, just let it set like a gelatin?
Yeah, exactly, like a gelatin. And so that's kind of what it did. And actually, gelatin may be a better way. It wasn't as gelatinous, if that's the word, as gelatin, but it would set like a gelatin. And after 30 minutes, as long as you greased your bowl properly, you just flip it over and it pops out.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And so does your stomach get filled on that, or is it more on the protein that comes with it?
I thought it was pretty filling, because if you think about it, the corn flour is going to be filling. You're mixing it with water, right? So there is that, and you have it with some protein. Again, it's eaten with a pepper sauce. So what I did was I really very quickly took some onions, took leftover tomatoes, fried that up together, added a little bit of spice, and ate that with it. And I liked it. It was quite delicious. It actually reminded me of a couple of other dishes that are not exactly the same, but I just found interesting that concept of taking a tomato base and mixing it with a starchy mix, for lack of a better word. So like, for instance, in Ghana, you have something called Gari Foto. And what that involves is you take Gari, which is processed cassava. It's like, how would you describe Gari? The texture, like grains, I guess.
Yeah, so Gari would be rather grainy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's to me, the consistency is closer to couscous.
Okay. Yeah. So Gari Foto, you take something like that and you basically mix it in with a stew. It's almost like stewed Gari that people eat. Because I haven't come across being Nigerian, I haven't come across a lot of Nigerian dishes where you take starchy processed flour, mix that in with the tomato base, and eat that as something. So I've seen that with Gari Foto, and I've also seen that with it's also Ghanaian. It's called Eto. And I remember I went to visit my mom's friend, and he told me it's a celebratory dish. It's almost like, imagine pounded yam, which yam is, when people think yam, they think sweet potato. But imagine if you took mashed potatoes and you mixed it in with stew. And so the whole consistency was the same, but a different color. So that's what this made me think of in a way.
Okay, that's interesting. So I think as part of this process, one of the things you wanted to document was the similarities and differences, and we've spoken about that a little bit today.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I wanted to touch on as well was, and the ingredients seem very, I wouldn't say basic, but I say accessible, right? And I think from the list, has been one of the most accessible ingredients I found. And the fact that you could swap cornmeal, I believe, with the corn flour, that I think was really interesting as well. So if you had to do this again, is there anything you would change?
No.
You really enjoyed it the way it was, hey?
I liked it the way it was. No, that's first and foremost. Two is, I'm being careful here. If I didn't like it, I would have said, in a way, I would have found a nice way to say I didn't like it, but I did like it. But this is a country's dish. And if my goal was to try out different things from different countries, I wouldn't be not at this stage anyway, I would not be one of the people, and there are people who would do it for you, but I would not be one of the people who would advocate for adjusting it to be more in line with something you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Now, if the question is, how can I change the taste up a little bit?
Yeah.
I could say you can play with the broth. I really think that's what is going to, and if you still don't like it, then you're just not going to like the meal.
And yeah, you'd also want to be respectful about the culture and where it's coming from as well. So not to essentially turn it into a different dish by changing it up so much. Right? And so that being said, is there anything else you would want to add about this meal or about the process or about, anything along those lines?
Yes, I want to brag because I got it.
Oh God.
I got it right, guys. And if you listen to the previous episode, well, it was a little bit disastrous. So when I flipped that thing over and I looked at it and I looked at the picture, I was like, booyah! Finally!
If you listen to our last episodes, you will hear that the meal didn't quite come out as planned.
Just a little bit of a deviation there.
That's what you get for trying to switch things up.
I know, right? But yes, please check out our blog, 234 Pantry on Instagram. Also because while the podcast mainly talks about food, when we do the posts on Instagram and as well on the website, there might be additional information about the country itself.
Yeah, for sure.
There's information about Benin Republic, fun facts about it. Shout out to Angelique Kijo. She's from Benin Republic. She's the most esteemed singer from Benin Republic with powerful vocals. I love her.
Yeah.
She has amazing cheekbones.
Okay. Before we start crushing on her, thank you so much for listening. That's the end of our episode on Benin Republic and on Amiwo. We will, not we, I'm going to whisper, but Ijeoma may cook more meals from Benin.
And come back. Please come back next time. Guys, stay safe. Please stay safe. Stay cautious. We're giving a shout out to health workers, to essential workers, to people who are affected by this, people who've lost their jobs. Please hang in there. This brings us to the end of another episode of Africa in the Kitchen. Till next time, thank you, goodbye, and stay safe.
Bye! Thanks for listening, friends. As a reminder, the podcast will be hosted every 2 weeks. Also, don't forget to follow 234 Pantry on Instagram, where Ijeoma shares her amazing journey of food exploration. The Africa in My Kitchen project is hosted under the TunukaMedia umbrella. Tunuka is spelled Tunuka. Follow TunukaMedia on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter to connect with the both of us. As we grow our portfolio, we are excited to have you join us on this and other amazing projects that we have coming up. Trust me, you are going to love them. We welcome ideas for African meals, treats, and even cooking tips to feature here. So please share them with us, and we'll be sure to give you a shout out. Right now, Ijeoma and I are here. Oh.
Well, we are kind of here.
I'm going to start again.
Okay.
Can
you hear me?
Yeah, beautiful. Hallelujah. You guys read in the description that I'm the. You guys read in the. Oh well. So
next time, is this awkward or what? COVID has made us awkward.
How do we end this in a non-awkward way? Okay. So bye.
Bye guys.
Stop.